Pull up a chair, friend. Get comfortable. Most folks my age, I'm 91 now, born in the spring of 1884, we know what it's like to have plans fall through. A crop fails, a business folds, a letter arrives with news that changes everything. But my mother,
It's all right
Eliza
now.
Grace
You're safe with
Harrington,
me.
I'm
her
scared.
plans didn't
I
just
know.
fall through.
We'll stick
They
together.
were torn to
This is
pieces
your final
on a
warning.
train
Leave now.
platform
Please,
in
we-
front
We
of the
backing
whole
down.
town
And face the
of
consequences.
Limestone Creek, Texas, on the hottest day of August 1883. This is the story of how a woman with $8 and a torn wedding dress became the foundation of everything I am, everything my children are, everything 5 generations of Ashfords have built on this Texas soil. And yes, we're still here. The ranch still stands. Her schoolhouse still teaches children who need it most. Let me tell you how it began. The heat came first. It arrived before the shame, before the whispers, before the final humiliation that would define the worst day of Eliza Grace Harrington's 24 years. She stood on the platform of Limestone Creek Station with the August sun beating down on her shoulders like the fist of an angry god. The wedding dress, ivory silk with Brussels lace at the collar and cuffs, every stitch sewn by her own hands over 6 months of careful work, clung to her back in damp patches that spread with each passing hour. 6 hours. She had been standing there for 6 hours. The telegram in her gloved hand had gone soft with sweat and repeated reading, though the words never changed no matter how many times her eyes traced the careful Western Union typography. Deepest apologies. Eliza watched a tumbleweed drift past the station platform pushed by wind that offered no relief from the oppressive heat. Texas in August was nothing like the pleasant descriptions in Dalton Pierce's letters. Those letters had painted pictures of cool evening breezes off the hill country Crystal Springs, a comfortable ranch house waiting for a bride who would bring refinement to the frontier. They had spoken of respect, partnership, security, everything a 24-year-old woman from Savannah, Georgia, had been told she would never find after her father's cotton business collapsed and left her with nothing but a teaching certificate and the desperate hope that a frontier marriage might offer escape. The letters had been lies, or perhaps not lies exactly. Perhaps Dalton Pierce had simply changed his mind upon receiving her photograph, the honest one she'd sent after his 3rd letter, the one showing her face as it actually was rather than the flattering portrait from her youth that made her look prettier, younger, more marketable. Perhaps he had found someone with more money, better connections, fewer questions about why a Georgia girl would travel 800 miles to marry a man she'd never met. Perhaps she simply wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Miss? Eliza turned to find the station master watching her with a mixture of pity and impatience that made her spine straighten despite the exhaustion flooding through every muscle. He was a thin man with a weathered face, his shirt yellowed at the collar, suspenders straining over a slight paunch that spoke of middle age and sedentary work. "I'm waiting for someone," Eliza said, though even she could hear the hollowness in her words. "Been waiting 6 hours now." The station master shifted his weight not unkindly. "Train's long gone. Anyone expecting you would have been here by now." He paused, seeming to weigh whether to continue. "Look, miss, I don't mean to pry, but this is Limestone Creek. Population 300, most of them men. It ain't exactly safe for a woman alone, especially one dressed like—" He gestured vaguely at her wedding dress. "Like that." Eliza's fingers tightened on her carpetbag. Everything she owned in the world was inside it. 2 dresses, a nightgown, a Bible she no longer opened with any real faith, a daguerreotype of parents long dead, and $8 in carefully folded bills. $8. The train ticket from Savannah to Limestone Creek had cost her $23. She had arrived in Texas with $31, her life savings, from 3 years of teaching children whose parents could barely afford to pay her, and now she had 8. "I'm expected at the Pierce Ranch," she said, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance that felt increasingly futile. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Pierce will send someone shortly." The station master's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine concern, which was somehow worse than the pity. Pierce. Dalton Pierce, who owns the small spread east of town. Yes? Do you know him? Know of him. The man scratched his jaw, choosing his words carefully. Miss, I don't know what arrangement you had with Dalton Pierce, but he left town 2 days ago. Took the eastbound train with Margaret Thornton, the banker's daughter. Had wedding rings on their fingers and everything. The platform seemed to tilt beneath Eliza's feet. That's impossible, she whispered. We've been corresponding for 8 months. He sent for me. He paid. She stopped, the truth settling in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water. Did he pay your passage? The station master asked quietly. Or did you pay it yourself, thinking there'd be reimbursement on arrival? Eliza's silence was answer enough. The man sighed, pulling off his cap to run a hand through thinning hair. Listen, miss, I've seen this before. Some men write letters to 6 women seeing who will bite. Others get cold feet when reality shows up on their doorstep. Either way, you standing here in a wedding dress ain't changing the fact that Dalton Pierce is married to someone else now, and you're alone in a town that don't look kindly on women in your position. My position, Eliza's voice came out sharper than intended. I'm a school teacher, a respectable woman who traveled here in good faith based on promises made. Respectable woman wearing a wedding dress with no groom, no family, no prospects, and by the look of your face, not much money either. He wasn't being cruel, just honest in the way frontier people were. That's the position I'm talking about, miss. Limestone Creek ain't Savannah. We got maybe 300 people here, most of them men. The respectable women are already spoken for, and the others, he trailed off meaningfully. Eliza felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. I am not one of the others. Didn't say you were, but that dress and that situation town won't see the difference. The station master reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn business card. My advice, get on the next eastbound train. Comes through tomorrow noon. Go back where you came from. I can't. The admission burned. I have no one back there, no home, no position. The station master's expression shifted to pity she couldn't bear to witness. He pressed the card into her hand and walked away before she could respond, leaving Eliza alone on the platform with the sun sinking lower and the shadows growing long. The card read, Mrs. Pritchard's Boarding House, Respectable Lodging for Ladies, 2nd Street. Eliza tucked it into her bag and picked up her trunk with both hands. The weight of it, everything she owned, everything she was, made her arms shake. But she had been raised by a mother who died too young and a father who gambled away a fortune. And if nothing else, Eliza Grace Harrington knew how to carry heavy things with her posture straight and her head high. She walked. Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house was a 2-story clapboard structure with a neat front garden and lace curtains in every window. It looked respectable, clean, safe. The door opened before Eliza could knock. Mrs. Pritchard herself stood in the doorway, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that assessed Eliza from head to toe in approximately 3 seconds. No rooms available, Mrs. Pritchard said, and started to close the door. Please? Eliza put her hand on the doorframe, not pushing, but not letting go. I just need a place to stay while I sort out my circumstances. I can pay. I said no rooms. Mrs. Pritchard's voice was firm. I run a respectable establishment, Miss Harrington? Eliza Harrington. Miss Harrington, I don't take in women who arrive alone in... Mrs. Pritchard's gaze raked over the wedding dress again. In questionable circumstances. Good day. The door closed with a finality that felt like a verdict. Eliza stood on the porch for a long moment, staring at the closed door, feeling something crack open in her chest, not quite breaking, but fracturing along lines that had been weakening for years. She tried 3 more boarding houses. All had rooms available. All refused her. By the time full darkness fell, Eliza had walked every street of Limestone Creek twice her feet, blistering in thin shoes never meant for unpaved roads. She had inquired at the general store about work. The owner had laughed, actually laughed, and told her to try the saloons if she was desperate. She had asked at the hotel about rooms. The clerk had quoted prices she couldn't afford for even a single night. She had knocked on the church door. It was locked, a handwritten sign indicating the pastor was visiting congregants 30 miles north and wouldn't return for 3 days. 3 days. Eliza had enough money for perhaps one meal, certainly not lodging. And the temperature, which had been oppressive during daylight, now dropped with the swift brutality of high desert nights, leaving her shivering in silk that offered no protection against the cold. She found herself standing outside a place called O'Brien's Diner, not by choice, but by the simple fact that it was the only building still lit and open as the town settled into sleep. Through the dusty windows, she could see people gathered around tables, cowboys still dusty from the range merchants closing out their day's accounting. A woman behind the counter pouring coffee and moving with the efficient grace of someone who had been doing this work for decades. The smell of food drifting through the door made Eliza's stomach clench with a hunger she had been ignoring for hours. She had $8. One meal wouldn't bankrupt her. And maybe, just maybe, someone inside would know of work, honest work, anything that didn't involve the kind of establishments the general store owner had suggested. Eliza pushed open the door. The bell above jangled, and a few heads turned, but most of the diners were too focused on their meals to pay much attention to a woman in a dusty wedding dress walking in alone after dark. She took a seat at the counter, setting her carpetbag at her feet and keeping her posture straight despite the exhaustion trying to drag her down. The woman behind the counter approached mid-50s with red hair going gray and laugh lines around green eyes that suggested a life of hard work and harder-won joy. "Evening, dear. You look like you've had a day." Her accent carried the lilt of Ireland, softened by decades in Texas. "I'm Fiona O'Brien. This is my place." "What can I get you?" "Coffee, please," Eliza said. And she glanced at the chalkboard listing prices. "What could I get for 50 cents? Mrs. O'Brien's eyes flicked to the wedding dress, to Eliza's dusty hem, and blistered fingers to the carpetbag that clearly held everything she owned, and something in her expression softened. "For 50 cents, let's see. Coffee's a nickel. That leaves 45 cents for—" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "When's the last time you ate, dear?" "Yesterday morning." The admission came out before Eliza could stop it. Mrs. O'Brien nodded once briskly and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with coffee hot and strong and real, and a plate piled with cornbread beans and a thick slice of ham that had to cost more than 45 cents. "I can't accept charity," Eliza said quietly. "It's not charity, it's business." Mrs. O'Brien refilled a nearby Cowboy's coffee without taking her eyes off Eliza. "I don't like waste. Had extra ham from lunch service. Cornbread's going stale. You'd be doing me a favor by eating it, otherwise it goes to the hogs." It was a lie, kindly told. Eliza's throat tightened with gratitude she couldn't voice. She ate slowly, making each bite last, and when she reached the cornbread golden and crumbly and still warm, she found herself carefully wrapping half of it in a napkin and tucking it into her bag. For tomorrow, for when 50 cents might have to last even longer. Mrs. O'Brien noticed but said nothing. "You looking for work, dear?" she asked, wiping down the counter. "I heard you ask about employment at Henderson's store earlier. Word travels fast in small towns." "I'm looking for anything honest," Eliza said. "I can cook, clean, teach, sew. I worked as a school teacher in Savannah for 3 years before—" She gestured vaguely at her dress. "Before circumstances changed. Mail-order bride situation gone wrong." Eliza nodded, too tired to be ashamed. Mrs. O'Brien sighed. "You're not the first, dear, and you won't be the last. Men out here get lonely. Start writing letters to women back east. Sometimes they're honest, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're honest, but circumstances change." She paused. "Dalton Pierce, I'm guessing. You know him, know of him. Small-time gambler who fancies himself a rancher. Always in debt, always scheming. Heard he married Margaret Thornton 2 days ago. She's got money from her father's bank. That's probably what he was after all along. The confirmation hurt more than it should have. Eliza had already known, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way the telegram hadn't. The problem, Mrs. O'Brien continued, is that work for single women out here is limited. The ranches around here, they need cooks and housekeepers, but hiring a woman alone, especially one with your situation, it causes talk. And most of the men who'd hire you would expect more than just cooking and cleaning, if you understand my meaning. Eliza understood. There's the school, Mrs. O'Brien said thoughtfully. But Miss Patterson's been teaching there for 12 years and isn't planning to retire anytime soon. The church might need help with charity work, but Pastor Williams can't pay for it. And beyond that, she trailed off, and Eliza could fill in the rest. Beyond that, there were the saloons and the establishments that existed in the shadows of respectable society, the places where women without options ended up when desperation overrode dignity. I'll find something, Eliza said, more to convince herself than Mrs. O'Brien. I always have. Mrs. O'Brien looked at her for a long moment, and something in her expression suggested she wanted to say more, but thought better of it. Finish your coffee, dear. You've got a place to sleep tonight. Not yet. Then you'll take the room above the diner. I rent it out sometimes to travelers. It's small, but it's clean and the lock works. $1 a night. Eliza did the math in her head. $8 minus 50 cents for dinner equaled $7.50. At $1 per night, she could afford 7 nights. After that, she would have to find work or starve. Thank you, she said quietly. I'll take it. Mrs. O'Brien waved away her thanks and disappeared to fetch a key, leaving Eliza alone at the counter with her coffee and the distant sound of men's laughter from one of the back tables. She was raising the cup to her lips when the bell above the door jangled. The man who walked in had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway and hands that looked capable of snapping wood with casual effort. He wore dusty work clothes that had seen better days, a hat pulled low over his eyes and spurs that jangled softly with each step across the wooden floor. But it wasn't the man that made Eliza's breath catch. It was the 2 children clinging to his legs like barnacles, moving with him in perfect synchronization, as if they were extensions of his body rather than separate people. They were young, maybe 5 and 7, both with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. The older one was a girl in a faded calico dress, her hair in 2 braids that had come loose at the ends. The younger was a boy in overalls, his face pressed against his father's thigh, as if trying to disappear into the denim. The man's face was weathered in the way of men who spent lives outdoors, lines carved deep around eyes and mouth by sun and wind, and years of squinting at horizons. His jaw was strong, shadowed with stubble, and his mouth was set in a line that suggested he didn't smile often or easily. But his eyes, gray like winter storms, held something that surprised her: gentleness. He moved carefully, adjusting his stride to accommodate the children attached to him, and when he reached the counter, he placed one large hand on the girl's head in a gesture so tender it made Eliza's chest ache. "Evening, Fiona," he said. His voice was deep and quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. "Usual for me and the kids. Coming right up, Cole." Mrs. O'Brien smiled at him with genuine warmth. "How's the ranch? Still standing?" He slid onto a stool 3 seats down from Eliza, the children arranging themselves on either side of him like bookends. "Had a fence break in the north pasture. Lost 20 head before we could round them up, but we got them back." "That's good. Coffee, please." Mrs. O'Brien poured, and the man Cole wrapped both hands around the mug as if grateful for the warmth despite the lingering heat of the day. The little girl tugged on his sleeve and whispered something Eliza couldn't hear. Cole leaned down, listening carefully, then nodded. "In a minute, Rose. Let me finish my coffee first." The girl Rose subsided, but her eyes remained fixed on her father's face with an intensity that spoke of deep attachment, maybe even anxiety. The boy hadn't looked up once, his face still pressed against his father's leg. Eliza found herself watching them, this man and his children, with a fascination she couldn't quite name. There was something about the way he moved with them, the patience in his every gesture, that spoke of a man who had learned how to be gentle through necessity rather than nature. Mrs. O'Brien returned with plates of food stew and cornbread for all three, and as she set them down, she glanced between Cole and Eliza with an expression that suggested wheels turning behind her eyes. "Cole," she said casually, "this is Miss Eliza Harrington. She's new to town. Miss Harrington, this is Cole Ashford. He owns the Ashford Ranch about 18 miles north of here." Cole glanced up, and for a brief moment his gray eyes met Eliza's. She saw assessment there, quick and thorough, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Not judgment, but curiosity, maybe. Or recognition of some kind, as if he saw something in her face that resonated with his own experience. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. "Mr. Ashford," Eliza replied, keeping her voice steady. And that should have been the end of it, a simple acknowledgement between strangers in a small-town diner. But then the boy, the silent one who hadn't looked up once, suddenly lifted his head, his eyes gray like his father's, but somehow softer, fixed on Eliza with an intensity that made her breath catch. He stared at her for a long moment, his small face serious and solemn and achingly young. Then he tugged on his father's sleeve with urgent insistence. Cole leaned down immediately. "What is it, Toby?" The boy whispered something so quiet Eliza couldn't hear, but whatever he said made Cole's expression shift from gentle patience to something sharper, more alert. "You sure?" Cole asked quietly. The boy nodded, still staring at Eliza. Cole straightened slowly, his gray eyes settling on her with new intensity. "Miss Harrington," he said carefully, "Fiona mentioned you were looking for work." "I am." Eliza kept her posture straight, waiting for the inevitable proposition, the suggestion that whatever work he had in mind would involve more than just honest labor. What kind of work? Anything respectable. I can teach, cook, sew, manage a household. I worked as a school teacher in Savannah for 3 years. "You good with children?" The question surprised her. "Yes, very good." Cole seemed to weigh this, his gaze flicking to his children and back to Eliza. "My late wife passed 4 years ago. I've been managing on my own since then, but—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "The ranch needs a woman's touch. The house needs keeping. And my children need someone who can teach them more than I know how to teach." Eliza's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Ashford?" "Depends. What were you expecting to be paid as a mail-order bride?" The bluntness of the question should have offended her, but instead she found herself appreciating the directness. "Mr. Pierce promised room board and a home," she said honestly. "I wasn't expecting wages, I was expecting partnership." "Then I'll offer you this $2 a week, room and board, Sundays off. You keep the house cook for me, and the ranch hands teach Rose and Toby their letters and figures. That's all I'm asking. Nothing more." His eyes held hers, and she saw no calculation there, no hidden expectations, just a man making an honest offer because he needed help, and she needed work. "Why me?" Eliza asked. "You don't know me." Cole glanced at her half-eaten plate, at the napkin-wrapped cornbread in her bag, at the carpet-bag that held everything she owned. "I know you saved half your cornbread for later," he said quietly. "I know you held your head high when you walked in here wearing a wedding dress because you got nowhere else to go. I know you didn't cry or beg or make a scene even though you probably wanted to." He paused. "That tells me you got character. That's all I need to know." Something in Eliza's chest loosened, not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope. "And your children?" she asked, looking at Rose and Toby. "What do they think?" Cole looked at his daughter. "Rose." The girl studied Eliza with serious gray eyes, then leaned close to her father and whispered something. Cole smiled a real smile that transformed his severe face into something younger, lighter, and nodded. "Rose says you look kind. And Toby." He glanced at his son, and something complicated passed across his expression. "Toby hasn't spoken aloud in 4 years, not since his mama died. But just now, he whispered to me, first word he said to anyone in all that time." Eliza's throat tightened. "What did he say?" Cole's gray eyes met hers, and she saw vulnerability there, raw and honest and achingly real. "He said, 'Mama.'" The word hung in the air between them, weighted with grief and hope and the desperate, fragile possibility of healing. "I'm not his mother," Eliza said gently. "I can't replace her. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to help me raise them, to teach them, to be present." Cole's voice roughened. "I'm asking you to give them something I can't give them on my own. And in exchange, I'll give you a home, a place where you're safe and valued and," he paused, "where you're not alone." Eliza looked at the children, at Rose with her hopeful eyes, and Toby with his silent intensity, and then at Cole, this stoic cowboy who was offering her exactly what she needed most. Not rescue, not charity, partnership, honest work, a place to belong. "When do I start?" she asked. The wagon ride to Ashford Ranch took 2 hours, following a dusty road that wound through hill country landscape, painted silver by moonlight. Rose had fallen asleep almost immediately, curled up in the wagon bed, with her head on a folded blanket. But Toby stayed awake, sitting between Eliza and Cole on the bench seat, his small body pressed close to hers, with a trust that felt both terrifying and precious. Cole drove in silence, his large hands steady on the reins, his eyes on the road ahead. Eliza found herself stealing glances at him in the moonlight, at the strong line of his jaw, the capable hands, the way he moved with the wagon, as if he and the horses were in conversation without words. "I should tell you," Cole said finally, breaking the silence, "about my late wife." "You don't have to." "I do." He kept his eyes on the road. "Her name was Caroline. We married young. I was 22, she was 19. We had Rose a year later, and Toby 2 years after that. We were," he paused, "happy, building something together. Then she died in childbirth 4 years ago. Baby didn't make it either." His voice remained steady, but Eliza heard the grief beneath it, old and scarred over, but still present, like a wound that never quite healed. "The children took it hard," Cole continued. "Rose stopped sleeping through the night for 2 years. Still doesn't sometimes, and Toby, he just stopped talking. Doctor said there's nothing wrong with his voice. It's his grief. He'll speak again when he's ready." "I'm sorry," Eliza said quietly. "Me too." Cole glanced at her. "I'm telling you this because I need you to understand they've been through hell. They're fragile in ways that don't show. Rose will test you, see if you're going to stay or leave like their mama did. And Toby, he'll watch you, judge you, decide if you're safe. It might take weeks before he trusts you enough to speak again, if he ever does." "I understand." "Do you?" Cole's gray eyes caught the moonlight. "Because I need to know you're in this for real. I can't have someone come into their lives and then leave when it gets hard. They can't survive another loss." Eliza thought about her answer carefully, knowing this was the moment that would define everything that came after. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "I have $8 to my name and nowhere else to go. I'm not going anywhere." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "Call me Cole. If we're going to be living under the same roof, might as well use first names." "Cole. Then you should call me Eliza." "Eliza." He tested her name, his voice making it sound different, somehow less formal, more personal. "It suits you." They fell into companionable silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the distant cry of a coyote somewhere in the hills. Toby's weight grew heavier against Eliza's side as he drifted toward sleep, and she found herself adjusting instinctively to support him, one arm coming around his small shoulders to keep him from falling. Cole noticed. She saw him glance down, saw something shift in his expression. He hasn't let anyone hold him since Caroline died, Cole said quietly. Not even me most days. Eliza looked down at the sleeping child against her side, this boy who had lost his mother and his voice, and perhaps his belief that the world could be safe, and felt something fierce and protective bloom in her chest. I won't let him down, she said. I know, Cole's voice was certain. That's why you're here. They reached Ashford Ranch just as the moon cleared the eastern hills, flooding the valley with silver light. The ranch was larger than Eliza had expected, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a natural basin, with hills rising on three sides. The main house was 2 stories built from native limestone, with a wide wraparound porch and real glass windows that caught the moonlight and threw it back in scattered fragments. Beyond the house she could see corrals and a large barn, a bunkhouse that probably housed the ranch hands, and several smaller outbuildings whose purposes she couldn't identify in the darkness. It was substantial, prosperous, the kind of property that represented years of hard work and careful management. 8,000 acres, Cole said, following her gaze. 3,000 head of cattle, 6 full-time hands plus day workers during branding and roundup. We run longhorns, mostly some Herefords I'm crossbreeding for better beef. It's not the biggest ranch in hill country, but it's ours. Built it with my father before he passed, and I'm building it for Rose and Toby. Pride colored his voice, not arrogance, but the quiet satisfaction of a man who had created something worth keeping. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, moving carefully to avoid waking Toby. But the boy stirred anyway, blinking up at Eliza with sleepy confusion. "We're home, buddy," Cole said gently. "Come on, let's get you to bed." He lifted Toby easily, settling the boy against his shoulder, then reached to help Rose from the wagon bed. The girl woke with a start, momentarily disoriented, then relaxed when she saw her father's face. Cole looked at Eliza. "I'll show you your room, then get the children settled. We can talk about particulars in the morning." He led her up the porch steps and through the front door into a house that smelled of dust and old wood smoke, and the particular emptiness of a place that had been without a woman's care for too long. The interior was dark lit only by moonlight filtering through windows, but Eliza could see enough to form impressions, solid furniture built to last rather than impress a fireplace with cold ashes, children's drawings tacked to walls, everything functional but slightly chaotic in the way of a household managed by someone who had more important things to do than keep perfect order. Cole lit a lamp and carried it upstairs, Eliza following with her carpetbag. The second-floor hallway was narrow with 4 doors leading off it. Cole stopped at the second door on the right and pushed it open. "This was Caroline's sewing room," he said quietly. "I cleared it out last month. Thought it might be time to—" He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself. "Anyway, it's yours now. Bed's made up fresh. Window faces east, so you'll get morning sun. Privy's out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed if you need it at night." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a quilt that showed careful stitching, a simple washstand with a blue ceramic pitcher and basin, and a writing desk beneath the window. The walls were bare except for one framed sampler that read, "Home is where the heart finds rest." It was more than Eliza had hoped for. "Thank you," she said. "It's perfect." Cole nodded, awkward now that the practicalities were handled. "Well, I'll let you get settled. Rose's room is across the hall. Toby's is next to mine at the end. My room's the last door. If you need anything in the night, just knock." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Eliza, yes, welcome to Ashford Ranch." Then he was gone, moving down the hallway with Toby still in his arms, and Eliza was alone in a room that smelled of lavender and old wood, and the possibility of a future she hadn't dared imagine 8 hours ago. She set down her carpetbag and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit ranch spread below. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed. A horse whinnied from the barn. The wind moved through grass with a sound like breathing. Eliza Grace Harrington had traveled 800 miles to marry a man who didn't want her, and instead she had found herself in a limestone ranch house with 2 grieving children and a cowboy who wrote his loneliness in work and silence. It wasn't what she had planned. But standing there in the moonlight, feeling the weight of the day's humiliation lifting slowly from her shoulders, Eliza thought that maybe, just maybe, it was something better. She reached into her carpet bag and pulled out the napkin-wrapped cornbread from the diner. Tomorrow she would share it with Rose and Toby, show them that she knew what it meant to save something precious for later, to plan for a future even when the present was uncertain. Tomorrow she would begin earning her place in this household. Tonight she would sleep in a real bed in a room with a lock that worked from the inside, and she would allow herself to hope. The moon climbed higher. The ranch settled into sleep. And in a small room at the top of a limestone house, a woman who had been forsaken began very quietly to believe she might have been found instead. The rooster crowed at 5:30, dragging Eliza from the first deep sleep she'd had in 3 days. For a moment she lay disoriented in the unfamiliar bed, watching dawn light creep across walls she didn't recognize. Then memory returned in a rush. The train platform, the diner, Cole Ashford's quiet. Offer the moonlit wagon ride to a ranch that now somehow was supposed to be home. She rose quickly, splashing cold water from the blue ceramic pitcher onto her face, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency, and dressing in the plainest of her 2 remaining dresses, gray cotton with a high collar and long sleeves suitable for work. Through the window she could see the ranch coming to life. Men emerged from the bunkhouse, moving toward the barn with the purposeful stride of those who knew their work. Smoke rose from what must be the cookhouse chimney. Cattle called from distant pastures, their voices carrying on wind that smelled of sage and dust, and something green she couldn't identify. Texas. This was Texas now. Eliza descended the stairs quietly, unsure of the household routine, but determined not to be found wanting on her first morning. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a large room with a cast-iron stove that dominated one wall, open shelving holding mismatched dishes, a long table that could seat 10, and windows overlooking a garden that had clearly once been tended but now grew wild with neglect. The stove was cold, the kitchen was empty, and everywhere Eliza looked she saw evidence of a household managed by someone doing his desperate best but fundamentally out of his depth. Dishes were clean but stacked haphazardly. The pantry was well-stocked flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, dried apples, but disorganized as if things were grabbed and replaced without system. The garden visible through the window showed the ghosts of what must have been Caroline's careful planning, now overtaken by weeds and volunteer plants growing wherever they pleased. Eliza felt something settle in her chest, not quite peace but purpose. This she knew how to fix. She started the fire in the cast-iron stove, using kindling from the box beside it, and working the dampers the way her mother had taught her 20 years ago. While the stove heated, she explored the pantry, taking mental inventory. Flour, cornmeal, lard, salt, baking soda. The basics for biscuits. Bacon, hanging in the cold cellar, eggs in a basket by the door, milk in a covered pail that had been left in the icebox overnight. She could work with this. By the time Cole descended the stairs 40 minutes later, Eliza had biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling in an iron skillet, and eggs ready to scramble. Coffee, real coffee, not chicory stretched, steamed in a blue enamel pot on the back of the stove. Cole stopped in the kitchen doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You didn't have to start this early," he said. "Ranch hands eat at 6, don't they?" Eliza flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency. "They need food before they work, and the children will be hungry when they wake." Something crossed Cole's expression, relief, maybe, or gratitude he didn't know how to voice. "They do," he said quietly. "Eat at 6, I mean. I usually just give them cold biscuits from yesterday and coffee. They don't complain, but they deserve better." Eliza pulled the biscuits from the oven, golden and flaky steam rising from their split tops. "Everyone deserves a hot breakfast before hard work." Cole moved closer, drawn by the smell, and Eliza saw him Really look at the biscuits, at the care evident in their making, the way they were uniform in size and perfectly browned. How'd you make them so? He gestured vaguely. Good? Lard not butter. Makes them flakier. And you fold the dough, instead of kneading it keeps them tender. Eliza began plating food with the efficiency of someone who had fed large groups before. My mother taught me before she died. Cooking was how she showed love when words weren't enough. The vulnerability of that admission surprised her, but Cole simply nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. Rose and Toby will be down soon, he said. Rose is an early riser. Toby usually needs coaxing, but he'll come for food. Should I wake them? No, let them come on their own time. First morning with someone new in the house, they'll be cautious. Need to approach at their own pace. The wisdom in that advice told Eliza more about Cole's parenting than hours of conversation could have. He understood his children's grief, respected it, worked around it rather than trying to force them past it. I'll set the table for the hands, Eliza said. How many are there? 6 full-time. They'll come through in shifts 2 at a time, so someone's always watching the herd. She had just finished setting out plates when the first 2 ranch hands appeared at the kitchen door, both in their 20s, dusty and weathered, with the lean build of men who spent lives in the saddle. They stopped when they saw Eliza's surprise evident on their young faces. Morning, Cole said. This is Miss Harrington. She'll be keeping house and teaching the children. Miss Harrington, this is Jake and Tommy. They work cattle. Ma'am, they said, in near unison, removing their hats with awkward courtesy. Sit, Eliza said, gesturing to the table. Food's hot. They sat cautiously, as if expecting this to be some kind of test. But when Eliza set plates in front of them, 3 biscuits each, bacon, scrambled eggs, and coffee, their caution transformed into something closer to reverence. The first bite of biscuit seemed to render them speechless. Ma'am, Jake said finally, this is the best thing I've eaten in 4 years. Better than best, Tommy agreed, already reaching for a second biscuit. This is real food. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, unused to such direct praise. It's just biscuits. No, ma'am, Jake said seriously. It's not just biscuits, He seemed to struggle for words. It's like having a ma again. Begging your pardon for being forward, but that's what it is. The emotion in his young voice made Eliza's throat tight. These were boys really barely past 20, probably far from their own families, living rough on a ranch where the food was fuel and nothing more. Until now. Well, she said, keeping her voice steady, there'll be hot breakfast every morning at 6, and supper at 7 when you come in from the range. They looked at her as if she'd offered them gold. The next shift came through 20 minutes later, older men, more weathered but equally stunned by the transformation in the Ashford Ranch kitchen. One of them, a grizzled cowboy in his 60s with kind eyes and a face like tanned leather, lingered after the others had left. Miss Harrington, he said, turning his hat in his hands. I'm Jesse Calhoun. I've worked for Cole since his daddy was alive. Been foreman here going on 30 years. Mr. Calhoun? Eliza inclined her head respectfully. Just Jesse, ma'am. I wanted to say, he paused, choosing words carefully. This ranch has been running on empty for 4 years. Cole's done his best, but a man can't be everywhere at once. The house needed a woman's hand. The children needed... He trailed off, glancing at the stairs where small footsteps could now be heard. Well, they needed someone. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be here, Eliza said, and meant it more than she'd expected. Jesse nodded, once settled his hat back on his head, and left just as Rose appeared in the kitchen doorway. The girl was still in her nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her gray eyes cautious as they fixed on Eliza. Good morning, Rose, Eliza said gently. Are you hungry? Rose nodded slowly, not speaking. There's biscuits and bacon, and I can scramble you some eggs if you'd like. Another nod. Eliza prepared a plate smaller portions than she'd given the ranch hands, sized for a 7-year-old, and set it at the table. Rose climbed into her chair with the careful deliberation of a child who was still waking up and began to eat with the methodical focus of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. "These are good," Rose said, finally, her voice small but clear. "Better than Papa's." "Don't tell him that," Eliza said, smiling. "It might hurt his feelings." "He knows his biscuits are terrible," Rose said, matter-of-factly. "He burns them on the bottom and they're raw in the middle. He tries, but—" She shrugged, a gesture far too world-weary for 7 years old. "Well, you won't have to eat burned biscuits anymore," Eliza promised. Rose studied her with those serious gray eyes. "Are you going to stay? Or are you going to leave like everyone else?" The question held weight far beyond its simple words. The accumulated fear of a child who had lost her mother and learned that people disappeared without warning. Eliza sat down across from Rose, meeting those gray eyes directly. "I'm going to stay," she said. "I don't have anywhere else to go, and even if I did, I wouldn't leave. Your papa offered me a job and a home, and I don't take those things lightly." "Promise, promise." Rose considered this for a long moment, then nodded as if some internal decision had been made. "Okay, then I'll show you where everything is. The house is big and there's lots of places to learn." "I'd like that very much." Toby appeared in the doorway, then silent as smoke, his eyes fixed on Eliza with that same intense focus from the night before. He wore overalls and a shirt that was slightly too small, his feet bare despite the morning chill. "Good morning, Toby," Eliza said, keeping her voice gentle. "Are you hungry?" The boy didn't respond with words, but he moved slowly into the kitchen and climbed into the chair beside his sister. Eliza prepared him a plate identical to Rose's and set it in front of him without comment or expectation. Toby ate in silence, but his eyes never left her face, watching, judging, trying to determine if she was safe. Eliza let him watch. She had nothing to hide. The days developed a rhythm that felt both foreign and oddly right. Eliza woke at 5:30, started the kitchen fire, and had breakfast ready for the ranch hands by 6. Cole ate with her and the children at 6:30, quiet meals where conversation was sparse, but the silences were comfortable rather than awkward. After breakfast, she cleaned the kitchen, then spent 2 hours teaching Rose and Toby their letters and figures at the kitchen table. Rose was quick and eager, absorbing information like a sponge and asking questions that showed real intelligence. Toby remained silent but attentive, following along with a slate board where he wrote answers to questions he wouldn't speak aloud. By the third day, Eliza realized that Toby could read better than his sister. His comprehension was remarkable for a 5-year-old, his ability to sound out new words far advanced. He simply couldn't or wouldn't use his voice to demonstrate what he knew, so she adapted. Let him write. Let him draw pictures to show understanding. Let him be silent while still being seen. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, at first he began to relax. Afternoons were for household work. Eliza tackled the house with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that creating order from chaos was how you built a foundation for everything else. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, organized the pantry, mended clothes that had been torn and set aside because Cole didn't have time to fix them. She found Caroline's sewing basket in a closet untouched for 4 years, and instead of feeling like an intruder, she felt honored to continue work that had been interrupted by tragedy. The garden became her evening project. An hour before supper, she would take Rose and Toby outside, and they would work together to reclaim what Caroline had planted. They pulled weeds, identified volunteer plants that could be kept marked areas for new planting come spring. Rose chattered constantly during these sessions, filling the silence with stories about her mother, how Caroline had loved flowers, how she'd sung while she worked, how she'd known the names of every plant and its medicinal use. "Mama said this one's comfrey," Rose said one evening, pointing to a plant with broad leaves and purple flowers. "She used it for bruises. You make it into a paste and put it on the hurt place, and it helps the swelling go down." "Your mama was right," Eliza said. "Comfrey's excellent for that. And this one here with the white flowers, that's yarrow, good for fever." Rose's eyes widened. "You know plants, too." My grandmother taught me. She was what folks called a yarb woman, someone who knew how to heal with herbs. Before I was a teacher, I thought I might follow in her footsteps. Why didn't you? Life took me a different direction. Eliza pulled another weed, adding it to the growing pile. But knowledge doesn't disappear just because you don't use it for a while. It waits until you need it again. Toby, who had been digging in the dirt nearby, suddenly appeared at Eliza's elbow. He pointed to a plant she didn't recognize, something with silvery leaves and a sharp, clean scent. "That's sage," Rose said. "Mama used it for cooking and for medicine both. She said it helped with grief." The last word came out smaller, and Rose's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. Eliza set down her gardening fork and opened her arms. Rose hesitated for only a second before collapsing into them, sobbing with the helpless abandon of a child who had been holding pain inside for far too long. "I miss her," Rose wailed against Eliza's shoulder. "I miss her so much, and it never stops hurting." "I know, sweetheart, I know." Eliza held her close, rocking slightly. "Missing someone you love, it doesn't stop, but it changes, gets softer around the edges, becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." "Does it really?" "It really does, I promise." Toby stood frozen nearby, his small face crumpling with emotion he couldn't voice. Eliza reached out one arm and pulled him into the embrace too, holding both children while they cried for a mother who would never come back. When the storm passed, Rose pulled back and wiped her eyes with determined swipes. "Papa never cries," she said. "He just gets quiet and works harder." "Some people cry on the inside where others can't see," Eliza said gently. "That doesn't mean they're not grieving. It just means they grieve differently." "Do you think Mama would like you?" The question caught Eliza off guard. I hope so." "I think she would." Rose's voice was firm with childish certainty. "I think she'd be glad Papa found you. That we found you." Toby nodded solemnly, and for the first time since Eliza had arrived, he deliberately took her hand and held it. 2 weeks into her employment, Eliza found Cole's journal. She hadn't been snooping, or at least she told herself she hadn't been. She'd been dusting the small study off the main parlor, a room Cole clearly used as an office for ranch business, and the leather-bound book had been lying open on the desk. The handwriting was surprisingly elegant for a man whose hands were calloused from rope and hard work. The words were poetry, spare and powerful, each line carrying weight. "The house remembers her in ways I can't speak. Her laughter in the walls, her voice in the creaking floors. The children look for her in every woman's face. And I am half a man, living half a life, waiting for something I cannot name." Eliza's breath caught. She knew she should stop reading, should respect his privacy, but the raw honesty of the words held her frozen. 4 years of silence louder than her voice ever was. 4 years of children who forgot how to beat children. 4 years of building fences and mending things that will never be whole. That's private. Cole's voice from the doorway made Eliza spin around, guilt flooding her face with heat. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was dusting and it was open, and I didn't mean to." "It's all right." Cole moved into the room, but his body language was tense. "I should have put it away. That's on me, not you. You write poetry." It wasn't a question. "Sometimes, when words won't stay inside anymore." He picked up the journal, closing it with careful deliberation. "Not very good poetry, just necessary." "It's beautiful," Eliza said honestly. "Sad, but beautiful." Cole looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. "You lost someone too, I can tell." "My mother when I was 12. Consumption took her slowly, 6 months of watching her fade until there was almost nothing left." Eliza's throat tightened with old grief. "And my father 10 years later. He gambled away our family business, then took his own life rather than face the shame. I was 22 and suddenly alone." "I'm sorry." "Me too." She met his eyes. "But I understand what you wrote, about being half a person, about building things that will never be whole. I felt that way for a long time. And now Eliza considered the question carefully. Now I feel like maybe I'm finding the other pieces. Not the ones I lost, those are gone. But new pieces, different ones that fit in unexpected ways. Something shifted in Cole's expression, a crack in the careful armor he kept between himself and the world. "The children love you," he said quietly. "Rose talks about you constantly. And Toby, he follows you everywhere, watches you like he's memorizing every gesture. They're good children, sweet and smart and braver than they know. They're healing. Because of you," Cole's voice roughened. "I couldn't give them that. I tried, but I didn't know how. I was drowning in my own grief and dragging them down with me. You kept them safe, fed them, clothed them, loved them. That's not nothing, Cole. That's everything." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Eliza felt something shift between them. An awareness that had been building slowly, unacknowledged, now suddenly undeniable. "Eliza," he started, then seemed to lose his nerve. I have work. Jesse needed me at the North Pasture an hour ago." He left quickly, the journal tucked under his arm, leaving Eliza alone in the study, with her heart beating faster than it should, and the dangerous realization that she was beginning to care for Cole Ashford in ways that had nothing to do with employment. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Eliza had come to the ranch. Jesse brought it up from town, his weathered face troubled, as he handed it to Cole over breakfast. "This came for Miss Harrington," he said. "From Dalton Pierce." The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eliza's hand trembled as she took the envelope, recognizing the handwriting that had once promised her a future and delivered only betrayal. "Do you want privacy?" Cole asked quietly. "No." Eliza broke the seal with sharp, angry movements. "Whatever he has to say, he can say it in front of witnesses." The letter was brief and poisonous. "Miss Harrington, it has come to my attention that you departed Limestone Creek carrying property that does not belong to you. Specifically, my grandmother's sapphire brooch valued at $500, which was entrusted to your care during our correspondence. I have filed a complaint with Sheriff Morrison and will be arriving in Limestone Creek within the week to reclaim my property. Should you fail to return the brooch, I will have no choice but to pursue legal action for theft. I trust you will make the right decision. Dalton Pierce." Eliza read the letter twice, fury and disbelief warring in her chest. "I never had any brooch," she said, her voice shaking. "He never sent me anything. This is—" She looked up at Cole. "This is extortion. He's lying." "I know." Cole's voice was calm, but his eyes were cold as winter storms. "The question is why? What does he want? Money, probably." Jesse spat into the yard with disgust. "Pierce is a gambler, always in debt. Probably figured Miss Harrington was an easy target woman, alone, no family, no way to defend herself against accusations." "He doesn't know I'm here," Eliza said slowly. "He thinks I'm still alone and desperate. Then we show him he's wrong." Cole stood his full height, suddenly intimidating. "Jesse, ride into town, find out what Pierce has filed with the sheriff, and see if anyone knows when he's arriving. On it, boss." Jesse grabbed his hat and was gone before Eliza could process what was happening. "Cole, I can't let you get involved in this," she said. "This is my problem, and you're part of this household now." Cole's voice was firm. "That makes your problems our problems, and I don't let anyone threaten my people." The possessiveness in those words, "my people," made something warm bloom in Eliza's chest, despite the fear churning in her stomach. Rose, who had been listening with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Is the bad man coming here? The one who left you at the train station?" "Yes, sweetheart, but—" "Then we won't let him take you." Rose's voice was fierce with childish determination. "Papa won't let him." "Right, Papa." "Right." Cole's hand came down gently on his daughter's head. "Nobody's taking anybody anywhere." Toby, sitting beside his sister, suddenly pushed back from the table and ran from the room. They heard his footsteps pounding up the stairs, heard a door slam. "I'll go," Eliza said, already moving. She found Toby in his room, curled on his bed with his face pressed into his pillow. His small shoulders shook with silent sobs. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and placed one hand carefully on his back. "It's all right to be scared," she said softly. "I'm scared too." Toby turned his head slightly, his tear-stained face visible now. "But you want to know something," Eliza continued. "I've learned that being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care about something enough to be afraid of losing it." Toby's gray eyes, so like his father's, fixed on her face with desperate intensity. Then, for the first time since his mother's death 4 years ago, Tobias Ashford spoke aloud. "Don't go?" The words were barely more than a whisper, rough from disuse and thick with tears, but they were real. Eliza felt her own eyes fill. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere, I promise you." Mama said that. Each word was an effort pulled from deep inside where he'd kept them locked away. Then she left. I know. And I know promises are hard to believe when someone you loved broke theirs. Eliza gathered him carefully into her arms. "But I'm not your Mama Toby, I'm me. And when I make a promise, I keep it, no matter what. Even if the bad man comes, even then." Toby threw his arms around her neck and buried his face against her shoulder, and Eliza held him while he cried not the silent tears he'd shed for 4 years, but real loud healing sobs that shook his whole body. Behind them in the doorway, Cole stood frozen with shock and wonder on his face. His son was speaking again. And the woman who had arrived 3 weeks ago with nothing but a torn wedding dress and $8 had just performed a miracle. Jesse returned from town that evening with news that confirmed their worst fears. "Pierce filed an official complaint 3 days ago," he said, gathering with Cole and Eliza on the front porch after the children were in bed. "Claims he gave Miss Harrington a sapphire brooch as an engagement gift, and she stole it when she fled their arrangement. He's got a witness, some jeweler in Austin, who supposedly appraised the piece, and a forged letter that looks like Miss Harrington's handwriting acknowledging receipt." "He's thought this through," Cole said grimly. "More than that. He's arriving day after tomorrow with Sheriff Morrison. They'll search Miss Harrington's belongings, and when they don't find the brooch, Pierce will claim she sold it or hid it. Either way, it'll be her word against his, and—" Jesse's weathered face was troubled. "Well, he's a man with property and connections. She's a woman alone who came west as a mail-order bride. Courts don't usually side with women in situations like this." "What's he really after?" Eliza asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I did some asking around," Jesse said. "Turns out your father's estate was finally settled last month. There's money, not a fortune, but significant. $2,000. It's being held in trust for you in Savannah. Pierce knows about it. Probably why he targeted you in the first place. The brooch accusation is leverage. He'll offer to drop charges if you sign over the inheritance." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Dalton Pierce hadn't wanted a wife. He'd wanted access to money he'd gambled away, and he'd found a vulnerable woman he thought he could manipulate into giving it to him. "He chose the wrong woman," Cole said quietly. His hand found Eliza's in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. "We'll fight this, together." "How?" Eliza's voice was steadier than she felt. "He has forged documents, a witness, and the law on his side. What do we have? The truth. And each other. And 6 ranch hands who will testify to your character." Cole squeezed her hand. "And me. A man with land and reputation in this county who's willing to stand up in court and swear you're exactly who you claim to be." "That might not be enough." "Then we'll make it enough." The determination in Cole's voice was absolute. "I didn't pull you out of that diner 3 weeks ago just to let some snake take you away now. You're part of this ranch, part of this family, and family protects its own." The word family hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. "There's one more thing," Jesse said hesitantly. "Pierce put out word he's looking to buy land in this area, ranch land specifically. Word is he's got backing from some railroad investors who want to run a line through hill country. Your spread, Cole, it's right in the proposed path. Cole's jaw tightened. So this isn't just about extorting money from Eliza. He wants my land too. Seems that way. Get her to sign over the inheritance, then use that money to pressure you to sell, or create enough scandal that your reputation suffers and your business follows. He's thought of everything, Eliza said quietly. Except one thing, Cole replied. He doesn't know who he's dealing with now. I've fought off cattle thieves, survived droughts, and raised 2 children through grief that should have broken us. Dalton Pierce is just another problem to solve. The confidence in his voice steadied something in Eliza's chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't facing this threat with nothing but her own fragile courage. She had Cole. She had the children. She had an entire ranch of cowboys who'd shown more loyalty in 3 weeks than most people showed in a lifetime. What do we do? She asked. We prepare, Cole said, and we make damn sure that when Dalton Pierce arrives, he finds something he didn't expect. What's that? Cole's smile was cold and dangerous in the moonlight. A woman with people who'll stand beside her, and a man who's done being alone. His hand was still holding hers, warm and solid and real. And somewhere in the darkness, Eliza heard a night bird singing a sound like hope or promise, or the dangerous possibility of a future she hadn't dared imagine. The storm was coming, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza Grace Harrington wasn't facing it alone. Dalton Pierce arrived on Thursday afternoon with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He came in a hired carriage, Sheriff Morrison riding alongside on a bay gelding, both men dusty from the 18-mile journey from Limestone Creek. Pierce was exactly as Eliza remembered, tall and well-dressed, in the style of Eastern men trying to impress Western towns, with slicked-back hair, and a smile that never quite reached his calculating eyes. The ranch hands saw them coming first. Jesse rode hard to the house, his weathered face grim. They're here, boss? About 5 minutes out. Cole was already moving his jaw set with the kind of quiet determination Eliza had learned to recognize over the past 3 weeks. He turned to her where she stood in the kitchen doorway, Rose and Toby pressed close against her skirts. You stay in the house, he said. Keep the children inside. I'll handle this. No. Eliza's voice was steady, despite the fear trying to close her throat. He came for me. I face him. Eliza, I won't hide Cole, not anymore. She looked down at Rose and Toby, both watching her with wide, frightened eyes. Take the children upstairs. I need to do this. Rose shook her head violently. We stay with you, Sweetheart, no. The fierceness in her 7-year-old voice was startling. If he's going to try to take you away, we're going to be there, right, Toby? Toby nodded, his hand gripping Eliza's skirt with white-knuckled intensity. His voice, still rough and uncertain from years of silence, came out in a whisper. We stay together. Cole's expression shifted, pride and worry warring across his face. All right, but you stay behind me, both of you. Understood. The children nodded solemnly. By the time the carriage pulled into the ranch yard, the entire household had assembled. Cole stood on the front porch, Eliza and the children slightly behind him. Jesse and the other 5 ranch hands, Jake, Tommy, Marcus, William, and Old Red, had positioned themselves strategically around the yard, their presence a silent statement of solidarity. Dalton Pierce stepped down from the carriage with theatrical flourish, adjusting his coat and surveying the ranch with the appraising eye of a man calculating value. Cole Ashford, he said, his voice carrying the false warmth of a practiced con man. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Dalton Pierce. I'm here on a matter of legal business concerning Miss Harrington. I know who you are, Cole said flatly, and I know why you're here. Question is, are you going to leave peacefully after I tell you no, or does this need to get difficult? Pierce's smile tightened fractionally. I'm afraid it's not that simple. I've filed a formal complaint with Sheriff Morrison regarding stolen property. That makes this a legal matter, not a personal one. Sheriff Morrison dismounted, looking uncomfortable in the way of lawmen who knew they were being used but couldn't quite refuse. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a badge that looked too new and a face that suggested he'd taken this job for the salary rather than the justice. "Mr. Ashford," the sheriff said, touching his hat brim, "I've got a warrant to search Miss Harrington's belongings for a sapphire brooch valued at $500. Mr. Pierce claims she stole it during their engagement period." "There was no engagement," Eliza said, stepping forward despite Cole's protective stance. "And there was no brooch. He never sent me anything except letters full of lies." "You see, Sheriff," Pierce's voice dripped with false regret, "she's already preparing her denial. But I have documentation letters proving I sent the brooch as an engagement gift, a jeweler's appraisal, even her own written acknowledgement of receipt." "All forged," Eliza said. "I never received any jewelry from you, Dalton. The only thing you sent me was a telegram telling me not to come 3 hours after I'd already arrived. I sent that telegram because I discovered your questionable character. A woman who would steal from her intended is not someone I could marry." Pierce pulled papers from his coat pocket. "Sheriff, here's the documentation. I think you'll find everything in order." Morrison took the papers, examining them with the squinting concentration of a man who wasn't particularly good at reading. "Looks official," he said finally. "I'm going to need to search Miss Harrington's room." "No." Cole's voice was quiet but absolute. "You're not searching anything until I see proof that those documents are legitimate. I'm the law here, Mr. Ashford, and I'm a property owner with rights. Show me a court order signed by a judge or get off my land." The sheriff's face reddened. "Mr. Pierce has filed a formal complaint, which doesn't give you the right to search private property without proper documentation." Cole's voice never rose, but something in his tone made the sheriff take a step back. "I know the law, Morrison. My father was county commissioner for 15 years. You want to search this house, you get Judge Brennan to sign off on it. Until then, you and Pierce can turn around and ride back to town." Pierce's mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "This is just delaying the inevitable, Ashford. I will get that brooch back, and Miss Harrington will face consequences for her theft." "There is no brooch," Eliza said, her voice stronger now, "and you know it. This whole scheme, the engagement, the lies, the accusations, it was never about marriage or jewelry. It was about my inheritance. You found out about my father's estate and decided I'd be an easy target. That's slander," Pierce said smoothly, "and I'll add it to the charges." "Is it slander if I can prove it?" A new voice cut across the yard. Everyone turned. A woman was dismounting from a fine black mare at the edge of the property, mid-40s, dressed in expensive traveling clothes with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She moved with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and when she approached the group, even Pierce seemed to shrink slightly. "Mrs. Colton," Pierce said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Ensuring justice is served, Mr. Pierce. Something you seem fundamentally opposed to." The woman turned to Cole. "You must be Mr. Ashford. I'm Margaret Colton, and I've been investigating Mr. Pierce's activities for the past 6 months." She withdrew a leather portfolio from her saddlebag and handed it to the sheriff. "Inside you'll find documented evidence of a pattern of fraud. Dalton Pierce has been running a mail-order bride scheme across 3 territories, targeting vulnerable women, promising marriage, then either abandoning them, or in Miss Harrington's case, attempting to extort money through false accusations." Pierce's face had gone pale. "That you can't prove, can't I, Mrs.?" Colton's smile was sharp as a blade. "I have testimony from 4 other women. I have copies of his letters showing identical promises made to multiple women simultaneously. I have gambling debts totaling over $3,000. And most damning, I have receipts from a forger in Austin named Ernst Klaus, who was paid $50 to create the documents you're currently showing the sheriff." She turned to Morrison, her voice hardening. "The brooch Pierce claims was stolen. It never existed. The jeweler's appraisal is fake. The letter acknowledging receipt is forged. And Mr. Pierce's real goal was to force Miss Harrington to sign over her $2,000 inheritance to clear his gambling debts. The sheriff was flipping through the documents, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "This is, Mr. Pierce, these are serious accusations. They're lies." Pierce's composure was cracking. "This woman has no authority." "I'm a federal witness, Mrs." Colton interrupted. "My late husband was James Colton, territorial judge for 15 years before his death. I've been working with federal marshals to document systematic fraud targeting women in frontier territories. Mr. Pierce's scheme is just one of many we're investigating." She pulled out one more document. "This is a federal warrant for Dalton Pierce's arrest on charges of mail fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Sheriff Morrison, I suggest you do your duty." The silence that followed was absolute. Pierce looked around wildly at the sheriff, at Cole, at the ranch hands, who had moved closer, blocking any escape route. His calculating eyes finally landed on Eliza, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. Rage, pure and venomous. "You think you've won?" He spat, all pretense of civility gone. "You're nothing. A woman with no family, no prospects, no future. You should have been grateful I even looked at you, and instead you—" "That's enough." Cole's voice cut across Pierce's tirade like a whip crack. He stepped in front of Eliza, his full height suddenly intimidating. "You don't speak to her, you don't look at her, you don't breathe in her direction. Sheriff, are you going to do your job, or do I need to hold him for the federal marshals myself?" Morrison was already moving, his discomfort evident, but his duty clear. "Dalton Pierce, I'm placing you under arrest. You have the right to—" Pierce lunged, not at the sheriff or Cole, but toward Eliza, his hand going for something in his coat pocket, his face twisted with fury. Three things happened simultaneously. Jesse and Jake grabbed Pierce from behind, slamming him face first into the dirt. Cole's arm shot out, pulling Eliza and the children behind him with protective force. And something small and metallic fell from Pierce's pocket, a Derringer pistol small enough to hide but deadly at close range. The sight of it made everyone freeze. "He was going to shoot her," Rose whispered, horror in her young voice. "He was going to hurt Miss Eliza." Cole's expression had gone absolutely cold. He bent down, picked up the Derringer, and handed it to the sheriff with controlled fury. "Add attempted murder to those charges," he said quietly, "and get him off my property before I forget I'm a civilized man." Morrison snapped handcuffs on Pierce with shaking hands, all pretense of authority replaced by genuine fear of what might happen if he didn't move quickly. As they dragged Pierce toward the carriage, the con man now screaming threats and accusations, Mrs. Colton approached Eliza. "Miss Harrington," she said gently, "I'm sorry I didn't arrive sooner. I've been tracking Pierce's movements, but I didn't know he'd targeted you until 3 days ago when I heard about the complaint he filed." "How did you know to come here?" Eliza asked, her voice still shaking from the adrenaline. "I made inquiries in Limestone Creek. When I heard you'd taken employment with Cole Ashford, I knew you'd likely be safe, but I wanted to ensure Pierce couldn't harm you further." She glanced at Cole with approval. "It seems you found good people, my dear." "The best people," Eliza agreed softly. Mrs. Colton handed her an envelope. "This is documentation regarding your father's estate. The $2,000 is being held in a trust bank in Austin. When you're ready to claim it, everything you need is in here." "Thank you," Eliza said, "for everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me after you've decided what to do with your life now that you're free of Pierce's threats." Mrs. Colton's eyes moved between Eliza and Cole with knowing wisdom, though I suspect you've already made that decision. She mounted her black mare with practiced grace. "Sheriff Morrison will need your testimony in town next week, but for now I suggest you rest. You've been through quite an ordeal." She rode away, leaving behind a stunned household and the settling dust of a confrontation that had nearly turned deadly. That evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch hands had returned to their quarters, Cole found Eliza sitting on the front porch staring out at the darkness. He settled beside her without speaking, and for a long moment they sat in comfortable silence. "I could have lost you today," he said finally, "but you didn't." only because Jesse and Jake moved faster than Pierce expected. Cole's voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. When I saw that gun fall out of his pocket, when I realized what he'd intended, but he didn't do it. I'm safe. We're all safe. Cole turned to look at her directly, moonlight catching in his gray eyes. Eliza, I need to tell you something, and I need to say it now before I lose my nerve or convince myself it's too soon or I'm being foolish. Eliza's heart began to beat faster. All right. When you arrived 3 weeks ago, I thought I was hiring a housekeeper. Someone to cook and clean and teach the children. Someone to fill the empty spaces in a house that had been quiet too long. He paused, seeming to search for words. But you became more than that. You became necessary. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Cole, let me finish, please. He took a breath. My children love you, not because you replaced their mother. You can't and you haven't tried to, but because you gave them permission to heal. Rose laughs again. Really laughs, not just the polite sound she was making before. And Toby, his voice caught. Toby spoke because of you, because you made him feel safe enough to try. They did that themselves, Eliza said softly. I just gave them space to do it. You gave them more than space. You gave them hope. Cole shifted closer, his shoulder touching hers. And you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. You made me remember what it feels like to want something beyond survival, to want more. Eliza could barely breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. The words came out quiet but absolutely certain. Not because you're convenient or because the children need a mother, though God knows they do. I love you because when you laugh, the whole house feels lighter. Because you split your cornbread in half to save for later, even when you're starving. Because you read my private poetry and called it beautiful instead of sad. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and you don't even know it. Tears were streaming down Eliza's face now. I love you too. I didn't mean to. I thought it was just gratitude or relief at being safe, but it's not. It's real. You're the first person who ever saw me as more than a problem to solve or a burden to carry. You saw me as enough. Cole's large hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away tears with heartbreaking gentleness. You're more than enough, he said. You're everything. He kissed her, then soft and careful and sweet, like he was afraid she might break. But Eliza kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of 3 weeks of falling in love with a man who wrote poetry and raised children and offered her a home when she had nowhere else to go. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Not because Pierce threatened you or because it's practical, though both those things are true. Marry me because I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. Because I want to build something together that's ours, not just mine or yours, but truly ours. Because, yes, Eliza laughed through her tears. Yes, of course, yes. They sat together on the porch as the night deepened, planning a future neither of them had expected, and both of them desperately wanted. And in the morning, when Rose came downstairs and found them still sitting there, Cole's arm around Eliza's shoulders, their hands intertwined, she let out a whoop of joy that woke the entire household. Does this mean you're staying forever? Rose demanded. Really forever, not just I'll try forever. Really forever, Eliza confirmed. And you're going to marry Papa if he still wants me after you hear me snore, Eliza teased. Rose threw herself into Eliza's arms with the abandon of a child who finally believed good things could last. And when Toby appeared in the doorway, his voice came out clear and strong, Mama Eliza, not Miss Eliza, not just Eliza, Mama. The word hung in the air like a benediction. They married 2 weeks later in the small church in Limestone Creek, with Pastor Williams officiating and the entire ranch in attendance. Eliza wore a simple cream-colored dress that Rose had helped her sew, and Cole wore his Sunday best with a wildflower boutonniere that Toby had picked that morning. Rose and Toby stood up with them, Rose holding Eliza's bouquet, and Toby clutching the rings with solemn importance. When Pastor Williams asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was broken only by Jesse's gruff voice from the back. "Anyone who objects can deal with me." Laughter rippled through the church. The vows were simple, traditional. But when Cole promised to love and cherish Eliza for all his days, his voice cracked with emotion. And when Eliza promised to stand beside him through whatever came, she meant every word with her whole heart. "You may kiss your bride," Pastor Williams said with a smile. Cole did thoroughly enough that Rose giggled and Toby covered his eyes. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and food prepared by every ranch wife, within 20 miles each woman wanting to welcome Eliza properly into their community now that the scandal of Pierce's accusations had been resolved. Mrs. O'Brien brought 3 apple pies. Mrs. Patterson from the general store brought roasted chicken. Even Mrs. Pritchard, who had turned Eliza away from the boarding house, appeared with fresh bread and a shamefaced apology. "I judged you wrongly," the older woman said. "I'm sorry for that. You deserved better." "We all deserve better than we sometimes get," Eliza said gently. "But we're here now, and that's what matters." As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the yard, Cole pulled Eliza into a dance clumsy and sweet and perfect. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied honestly. Over his shoulder she could see Rose and Toby dancing together, both giggling. She could see the ranch hands sharing drinks and stories. She could see a community that had rejected her 3 weeks ago now celebrating her belonging. "I have something for you," Cole said. He pulled a small leather-bound journal from his pocket. "I wrote something for you." Eliza opened it to find a poem in his elegant handwriting. She arrived in ruins carrying hope like a broken bird, found a house that remembered grief in every creaking board, children who had forgotten their voices, a man who had forgotten how to want anything but tomorrow. She didn't fix us. We were never truly broken, just waiting for someone brave enough to remind us what living felt like. She came with nothing and became everything Eliza's throat was too tight to speak. She simply kissed him again there in the middle of the dancing crowd and silently promised to be worthy of words that beautiful. 5 years passed like water over stones, smoothing rough edges, carving new channels, creating something different from what had been, but better for the transformation. Rose turned 12, tall and confident with her mother's grace and her father's steady competence. She helped Eliza teach the growing number of students who came to the ranch for lessons, children from neighboring ranches whose parents couldn't afford the town school or who, like Rose and Toby once had, needed somewhere safe to learn. Toby, now 10, had become his father's shadow learning ranch management with the serious dedication of a boy who knew this land would someday be his responsibility. His voice, once silent for 4 years, now filled the house with questions and observations and the occasional terrible joke that made everyone groan. And there was Caroline Rose, born 11 months after the wedding, named for Cole's first wife with Eliza's blessing. She was 4 now, with Cole's gray eyes and Eliza's dark curls, fearless and joyful, in the way of children raised in security and love. The ranch had grown too. 8,000 acres had become 12,000. 3,000 head of cattle had become 5,000. The bunkhouse had been expanded to house 10 full-time hands, and a proper schoolhouse had been built near the main house, a limestone structure with real desks and a bell tower. And Eliza's name carved above the door, Harrington Ashford School. But the biggest change was invisible, the way grief had transformed from something that crushed them into something they carried together lighter for being shared. On a spring evening in 1888, Eliza found Cole in his study, writing in his journal. She'd learned not to interrupt when he was working through feelings in poetry, but he looked up as she entered and smiled. "Come here," he said, pulling her onto his lap, despite her laughing protests about being too old for such things. "I want to show you something." He turned the journal so she could read. 5 years ago, she arrived in ruins. Today she teaches our daughter to read. Yesterday she delivered Martha Henderson's baby when the midwife couldn't come. Tomorrow she'll wake at dawn and make biscuits that turn ranch hands into poets. She still splits her cornbread sometimes, saves half for later, from old habit. I don't tell her we'll never be that hungry again, because it reminds me where we started and makes me grateful for where we are. That's beautiful, Eliza said softly. It's true. Cole kissed her temple, every word. From somewhere in the house they heard Caroline's high voice demanding a story, Rose patiently explaining for the third time why chickens couldn't live in the house, and Toby's laughter echoing down the stairs. We built something good, Eliza said. We did. Cole's arms tightened around her. And we're not done yet. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children and the steady accumulation of a life well lived. Eliza's inheritance, the $2,000 from her father's estate, was never claimed. She wrote to the trust bank explaining that the money should be donated to an orphanage in Savannah, the one where she'd volunteered as a girl before her father's disgrace. I don't need it, she told Cole. I have everything that matters. You earned that money, he protested. No, my father earned it through schemes that hurt people. I won't build my life on that foundation. She touched his face gently. Our life is built on work and love and choice. That's worth more than any inheritance. By 1895, the ranch employed 25 people. Rose, now 19, had married a young doctor from San Antonio, a good man who treated her like the treasure she was. She was pregnant with their first child, and Eliza was going to be a grandmother at 36. Toby was 17, running the ranch with his father and showing the same quiet competence that had always defined Cole. He'd started courting a neighboring rancher's daughter, a practical girl named Sarah, who could rope cattle and quote Shakespeare with equal facility. Caroline Rose was 10, with Eliza's passion for teaching and Cole's steady determination. She spent every free moment in the schoolhouse, helping younger students and dreaming of the day she'd be old enough to teach on her own. And there were 3 more children, twin boys named James and Jesse, after Cole's father and the foreman who'd stood by them, now 7 years old and into everything, and little Margaret, 5, named for Mrs. Colton, who had saved Eliza from Pierce's accusations all those years ago. The house rang with noise and life and the beautiful chaos of a large family that loved each other fiercely. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Eliza back to the church in Limestone Creek where they'd married. I want to renew our vows, he said. Say them again now that we know what they really mean. So they stood before Pastor Williams, older, now his hair gone completely white, and repeated the words they'd spoken a decade ago. But this time, when Cole promised to love and cherish Eliza for all his days, his voice was steady. And when Eliza promised to stand beside him through whatever came, she knew exactly what that promise would cost and chose it anyway. Their children, all 6 of them, stood witness, along with ranch hands who'd become family and neighbors who'd become friends. 10 years, Cole said that night as they lay in bed, Eliza's head on his chest. Feels like both forever and no time at all. Tell me the story again, Eliza said. It had become their ritual, Cole narrating their beginning like it was a fairy tale. Once upon a time, he began, his voice soft in the darkness. A woman arrived at a train station wearing a wedding dress meant for a man who didn't deserve her. She had $8 and nowhere to go, and a cowboy with 2 broken children walked into a diner and saw her split her cornbread in half to save for later. He knew right then she was the one, not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was desperate, though she was, that too. But because she had the kind of strength that doesn't break under pressure, the kind that bends and adapts and finds ways to survive. And then, Eliza prompted, though she knew the story by heart. And then he took a chance, offered her a job she was overqualified for, brought her home to a house full of grief and silence and broken things. And she, this remarkable woman who'd been told she was worthless, she stayed. She taught his children how to speak again. She made his house a home, She loved him when he didn't know how to love himself. "That's not how I remember it," Eliza said. "I remember a man who saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself, who gave me a place to belong when the world said I deserved nothing, who wrote poetry about loneliness and raised children with tenderness and built a life worth living." Cole kissed the top of her head. "We saved each other." "We did." They fell asleep that way, intertwined and comfortable and utterly secure in what they'd built together. 20 years became 30. 30 became 40. Rose's children, 4 of them, grew up running wild on the ranch alongside their cousins. Toby took over full management when Cole turned 65, but the old cowboy still rode out every morning to check fences and count cattle, unwilling to give up work that had defined him for so long. Caroline became the school teacher Eliza had always known she would be, taking over the Harrington-Ashford School and expanding it until children came from 50 miles away to learn from her. The twin boys went into business together, starting a livestock trading operation that made them modest fortunes. Margaret married a lawyer and moved to Austin, but came home every Christmas with stories of city life that made the ranch children's eyes grow wide. Eliza kept teaching until she was 73, when arthritis in her hands finally made holding a piece of chalk too painful. On her last day, 40 former students, now adults, with children of their own, came to honor her with testimonials and tears and a bronze plaque that read, "She taught us more than letters. She taught us grace." Cole was there, 81 now, and moving slower, but still present, steady as the sunrise forever hers. That night, they sat on the porch swing, the same porch where he'd proposed, where they'd raised children, where they'd built a life from nothing but hope and hard work. 52 years, Eliza said, marveling. "We've been married 52 years. Best decision I ever made," Cole replied, his hand finding hers with the automatic ease of 5 decades of practice. "Offering you that job." "Second best," Eliza corrected. "Best was asking me to marry you." "Same thing, really." One led to the other. They rocked in comfortable silence, watching grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the yard where once 2 grieving children had learned to laugh again. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eliza asked. "The train station, Pierce's accusations. How close we came to never having this." "Sometimes," Cole admitted. "And then I think about how you split your cornbread, how you kept your posture straight even when the world was trying to break you, and I think that's who she is. That's who she's always been. Strong enough to survive anything." "I wasn't strong," Eliza protested. "I was terrified. Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs doing despite the fear." Cole's voice was soft with age, but still certain. "You taught me that. You and the children, you taught me what real courage looks like." The sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson that never got old no matter how many times they watched. "I'm tired," Cole said suddenly, not complaining, just stating fact. "I know, love. Me too." "Not yet, though. Not while you still need me." Eliza squeezed his hand. "I'll always need you. Then I'll stay as long as I can." Cole died on a Wednesday morning in 1935, just after dawn. He'd been ill for weeks, his heart finally giving out after 88 years of steady beating. Eliza had barely left his bedside, holding his hand through the long nights, reading him poetry he'd written decades ago, reminding him of the life they'd built together. The children were there at the end, Rose with silver in her hair now, Toby gray and weathered like his father. Caroline still beautiful at 50, the twins solid and dependable, Margaret traveling from Austin the moment she got word. 27 grandchildren, 15 great-grandchildren, and Eliza 76 years old and still holding his hand. Grace used to say, Cole's voice was barely a whisper, using the middle name he'd learned on their wedding day, and called her only in their most intimate moments. She used to say love was just choosing the same person every day. You chose me every single day for 52 years. That's everything. I'd choose you again, Eliza said, tears streaming down her weathered face. Every time, every day, forever. Cole smiled that rare transformative smile that had first appeared the day Toby spoke and never entirely left his face after. "See you soon, my heart." His eyes closed. His chest rose once more, then stilled. And Cole Matthias Ashford, cowboy and father and poet, and the love of Eliza's life, was gone. She saw the ranch continue to grow under Toby's management. She watched great-great-grandchildren born, baptized, married. She taught reading to her last student when she was 93, a shy girl from a neighboring ranch who was told she was too slow to learn, and Eliza proved once again that every child could learn if someone took the time to see them. She moved slower, forgot names sometimes, but her mind stayed sharp, and her bearing remained unbowed, and every evening she sat on the porch swing and talked to Cole as if he were still beside her. "The twins turned 70 today," she'd say. "Can you believe it? Our babies are old men now," or "Rose's granddaughter is pregnant with twins. That makes us great-great-great-grandparents. How is that even possible?" Or on hard days, "I miss you. God, I miss you so much it still takes my breath away." On February 14th, 1956, Valentine's Day fitting for a woman who'd found love when she'd least expected it, Eliza Grace Harrington Ashford died peacefully in her sleep at 97 years old. She was surrounded by family. 43 direct descendants present in the house, with more traveling as fast as they could when word went out that Grandma Eliza was failing. Her last words, whispered to Toby, who held her hand, "Tell your father, I'm coming. And yes, I brought cornbread." She died, smiling. They buried her beside Cole under the oak tree where he'd proposed 68 years earlier. The funeral was attended by 300 people, former students, ranch hands, neighbors whose grandparents had known the Ashfords. The governor of Texas sent a telegram. The president of the University of Texas, one of Eliza's first students, came in person. But the most moving tribute came from Tobias Ashford, Jr., 72 years old and still clear-eyed, who stood at his mother's grave and told their story one last time. "My mother arrived in Texas with $8 and a torn wedding dress," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "She'd been betrayed, abandoned, and told she was worthless. But a cowboy with 2 broken children saw something different. He saw strength. He saw grace. He saw a woman who split her cornbread to save for later, and he knew that's someone worth keeping." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. "They built this ranch together, raised 6 children, and loved each other through 52 years of marriage and 21 years of her widowhood. And because of them, because a desperate woman and a lonely cowboy took a chance on each other, there are now 207 of us. 207 people who exist because they chose love over fear, because they chose each other." He looked around at the assembled crowd, descendants and friends, and the legacy of a life well lived. The Harrington Ashford School still operates, 5th generation of our family teaching children who need it most. The ranch still stands, still employs good people doing honest work. And somewhere, he looked up at the sky, somewhere, my parents are together again, probably arguing about who makes better biscuits and planning what to build next. Laughter rippled through the crowd, wet with tears. That's their legacy, not the land or the money or even the school. Their legacy is us, all of us. Every person here who knows what it means to choose love, to choose family, to choose grace, even when the world offers none. He placed his hand on his mother's headstone. "Thank you, Mama, for teaching me to speak again, for loving a broken family back to wholeness, for showing us all what strength really looks like." The sun was setting over the ranch, painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and crimson as the last mourners departed. But if you stood very quiet under that oak tree, listening to the wind move through the grass, you might have heard something that sounded like laughter, like the whisper of old love renewed, like a cowboy and his bride finally together again, continuing a conversation that death had only briefly interrupted. The ranch endures. The school still teaches. And the story of Eliza Grace Harrington, the mail-order bride who arrived with nothing and became everything lives on in every descendant who knows that sometimes the best families aren't born. They're built by people brave enough to choose each other when the world says they shouldn't. They're built by cornbread split in half, by poetry written in loneliness and answered in love, by children who learn to speak again, by cowboys who learn to hope again. They're built by grace, and they last forever.